I've had a few questions on how the kill switch and the ignition works on these boat motors, so I'm going to go ahead and show you. So stay tuned. Okay, I'm going to pull this flywheel off here. See, this motor doesn't have the charge coil right here for the charge your battery and stuff, for lights and everything. It'd be nice to have that, even though it's not electric start, just to keep your battery up and all that. But anyhow, that's another story. I just want to show you these magnets inside here. You know, sometimes they'll come loose on some models, but this one looks pretty good. But how this works, this ignition, these magnets, as the magnets pass it after a certain RPM reaches, and it charges this coil. Basically, it gets right around 300 volts AC, which in turn charges the ignition capacitor. See, this is the ignition coil, and it's got a capacitor in there, and it charges that capacitor. And then, once the magnet comes back around and reaches this little mark right here on there, it's like a little coil just like these, it releases the charge, which is basically the timing. That's why if you shear your keyway or something, your magnet and this here doesn't release the voltage at the right time, and it gets you out of time. And you know, that works to a series of switches on this, which they call SCRs. And once that releases, it goes around to the coils. Once that releases here, then it sends the voltage to this coil, which in turn sends it through the spark plug wire, and which makes the plug arc. But what happens by the time that coil, the voltage goes through here and it's built up again, it can put out as much as 40,000 volts to these spark plugs. That's why when you get bit by that spark plug wire, you call your dogs by its mother's name. Right there. That's why that hurts so darn much. So anyhow, you got it? the magnet spins, charges this, sends voltage to the ignition module, which has a capacitor in there, stores the energy. As the magnet comes back around, it don't touch it, but it goes past this, releases it at the right time. It sends it over to the coil here for your spark plug coil, puts it out to ignition, and the spark plug fires. Just that easy. It's not a big deal. Everybody worries about, oh, it's this, it's that. It really isn't that big a deal. It ain't much more complicated than your lawnmower. But the ignition module can do some other things for you too. It has the slow warning system, which limits the engine speed to approximately 2,000 RPMs if the engine temperature exceeds 180. Once in slow warning is activated, it must cool down below 155 degrees before it will go back into its normal mode. It will limit the RPM from excessive RPMs. Like if you got the wrong prop or something like that, or your prop comes off, you won't let it sit there and over rev either. It will control that. So I mean, it does a few things for you. And like I said, it's hooked to the thermostats right here in the front, your brown wires, and right here goes around, connects to it. So I mean, it senses the head temperature and all that. So like I said, there ain't a whole lot to it right there. Magnets, charge coil, and an ignition module. I had one of our YouTubers ask me about this, the emergency stop, and how that works, and that's right here. The emergency stop switch is connected to the ignition module through the engine wiring harness. When you activate that switch or pull this plug off right here, like that, all that does is run the circuit to the ground, which in turn stops the engine. So when you clip the lanyard back on, then it removes that ground. And that's back in the run position. You can also stop your engine while this is on there by just pushing in on it. That's a push button. So if the engine's running, you don't have to pull this thinking you're going to wear it out. You can just push that in and the engine will stop. But that's all that does, is just ground out the ignition. And of course, in case if you ever lose this, I've got an extra one right here up on top. But you know, you can just, if you were out in the ocean or out in the water somewhere, you can always get something to hold that out. I've pulled them out with my fingers before and held them to get back to shore.